and the attempt to change the way the nation thinks about these things. We're now in a negative world that views Christianity negatively. It is bad and it is dangerous. 30% tend to customize their faith to fit the rest of their lives. This is because of what's known as the triumph of the therapeutic and the triumph of the self. Our society, our culture has said what really matters is, am I happy? And all things should be geared toward making me feel happy. That's the way we think now, right? What happens if you don't get good customer service? I'm going to the manager. In the past, if you didn't get good customer service, well, I either won't shop there again or maybe they're just having a bad day. But now I must be validated and I must be made to feel happy. 15% believe in some higher power but are not sure what that is or means. This is a survey of a number of people in late teen, early 20s. About 25% of the emerging adult population may claim to be religious or even appreciate religion, but it simply does not matter. There's a new book out called Apatheism. It's describing a generation of younger people, not just teenagers in college age, but people 40 and under that say, I'm not against religion, but I just don't care. That's a tough thing to deal with. Determinedly irreligious college students that say, I'm not religious at all. They had attended church at one time. The mission and message of the churches was vague. So it'd be fun to bring your teenagers in here and say, what is Sussex County Bible Church all about? Without any prompting, ask them that. That might be revealing. Like, do they really know what this church is all about? I'd be afraid to ask my college students that question. They felt their church offered superficial answers to life's difficult questions. We should not give superficial answers. If someone comes to you and says, I'm struggling with my sexuality, don't say, just pray about it, honey, God will make it all right. No, there might be significant issues there that need genuine help and prayer and significant counsel. Let's not treat deep-seated problems superficially. Let's not put a Band-Aid on the tumor. They expressed their respect for those ministers who took the Bible seriously. I read a lot of atheistic literature, and the one group of people atheists have no time for is those who claim to be Christians who don't really take it seriously. Liberal theologians, people who treat their faith casually. Atheists have no respect for that. They say, I think Christians who really believe it are weird lunatics, but at least they really believe it. The time between ages 14 and 17 were decisive for either solidifying or abandoning faith. And the decision to embrace unbelief was often an emotional one. Realize at the end of the day, while there may be intellectual objections coming from here, what's at the root of so many people walking away from the faith is right here. As we'll talk about tomorrow morning, they've suffered greatly. Maybe someone has sexually abused them. Maybe their parents have emotionally damaged them, and they walk away and they say, I cannot believe in a God who could have done something and then didn't. We have to realize at the root of many people, it's a heart issue. And the internet factored heavily into their conversion to atheism. I cannot underestimate the power of electronics, social media, technology for undermining the faith of many people. Elizabeth Corey, Youth Theological Initiative, says this: teens want to be challenged. They want their tough questions taken on. We think that they want cake, but they actually want steak and potatoes, and we keep giving them cake. Churches, not just parents, share some of the blame for teens' religious apathy. The gospel of niceness can't teach teens how to confront tragedy. It can't bear the weight of deeper questions. Why are my parents getting a divorce? Why did my best friend commit suicide? Why in this economy can't I get the good job I was promised if I was a good kid? We think the kids' struggles are way up here when actually they're very, very deep, and we need to notice that and to address that. If adolescents experience parents who are religiously withdrawn and functionally absent, then the faith of an emerging adult likely will also be vacuous, directionless, and empty. The more adults involved in the lives of adolescents, the better off they will be. This will mean that ministries to youth and families must find ways to incorporate loving, agenda-free adults into the lives of the ministry. Please, let me tell you, as a church, what you need most to do is to say, regardless of whether I love children or teens, I need to ask, in what way can I at least encourage the teens in my church? Now, I know teens are scary. Do we have any teens left in the room, or did they all leave? If you're a teenager, raise your hand. Okay, there's a couple. You terrify the adults in this room. But what you don't realize is they're terrified of you. What we need in church is our adults that go out of the way to go up to Josh's daughter. Now, don't all do this tomorrow all at once. But to say, honey, I don't know you that well, but I just want you to know I'm thrilled to see you every Sunday, and I pray for you. You might think, what is that really going to matter? For this teenager, these teens to grow up in a church knowing these adults in the church know my name, they pray for me, and they'll come up to me and talk to me sometimes. Sure, it might be a little bit awkward, but I know they care about me. That makes a huge difference in them recognizing that this church, this body, knows who I am, and I don't have to be an adult for that to matter. I can be a kid, I can be a teenager, and I love these kids, and this is a church that supports my faith. It's very important. So what is the answer? First of all, finally to your handout, there is no formula that guarantees that a child will become a believer or will never depart from her faith. That's so important. In 2 Chronicles chapter 27 and 28, we have the decline of Israel as a nation. And we're told in 2 Chronicles 27, we have Jotham, the good king. Before him, Uzziah, the good king. 2 Chronicles 28. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, had a godly father, godly grandfather. And he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord as his father David had done, but he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. Wicked king does abominations, and guess what his son does? Turns right around and becomes a righteous king. There is no formula. You can do everything right. Parents, you can do everything right, and your kids can still walk away from the faith. You can do everything wrong, and your kids could be godly. Now, that doesn't mean what you do doesn't matter. I grew up, as I said, in a highly dysfunctional home. When my parents would fight, we lived out in the woods in the country with just a few neighbors. I could be 100 yards up the road and hear my parents yelling and screaming at each other, cussing each other out, calling us home so we'd go to church. And you know what? My sisters and I all have never walked away from the faith. We are all involved in Christian ministry all of our lives. And recently, one of our childhood friends who grew up in a very stable, loving home said, isn't it interesting that the Farnham kids all grew up to serve the Lord, and here, me and my brother, we're both living for money. We're both very wealthy, and we never had any desire to serve God, and yet our parents grew up, loved each other, and taught us the truth. There is no rhyme or reason. However, as we'll see in just a moment, the best thing you can do to prepare your kids to love God and let their faith be central to their lives, there are things that we can do about that. So more is not the answer. Very quickly saying, let's go to church 7 days a week and get them involved in everything. That doesn't guarantee it. More is good if what they're going to, what you're bringing them to, really encourages their faith. There's no great virtue in going to church more often if your church doesn't preach the gospel and disciple people in the faith. Information is not the answer. Sometimes people think, oh, I'll just force my kids to read the Bible an hour a day. We'll have an hour of family devotions every night. That will not guarantee anything. In fact, one of the most well-known apologetic sites, I think it's actually listed in here at the very end. I want to see which one it is. The Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry on page 20, carm.org. Matt Slick runs that. His daughter Rachel is an atheist. And a while ago, if you search the name Rachel Slick, S-L-I-C-K, she's written about growing up in her parents' home and how every night at dinner her dad would quiz her with apologetic questions. Rachel, what do we say if someone denies the Trinity? And she was forced to repeat the answers over and over and over again. She grew up and left the faith. So even though she was surrounded all the time by the truth, in her heart she rejected it, and so she walked away. So constantly drilling your kids on the truth isn't going to solve the problem, even though, as the Bible says in Deuteronomy 6, everywhere we go, we should be talking about the Lord. We should learn to do that well at opportune times. Strictness is not the answer. Well, we will just not allow our kids to ever watch TV at all, and they won't be able to play with the unsaved neighbors next door, and they can only listen to Christian music or classical music. Listen, most of the kids I grew up with had that kind of life, and most of the kids I grew up with no longer believe in God. Their parents were so strict that the kid says, as soon as I get out of here, I'm ditching it all. So strictness doesn't solve the problem. Here's Vera Farmiga, a well-known actress. I grew up in a Christian home. The strictness comes with religion in general, whether you grew up Jewish, Orthodox Jewish, or Muslim. There are certain rules and regulations, but my parents instilled in me the importance of defining God for yourself. So she grew up in a very strict home, but she walked away because ultimately the message she got was, God will be who I says he is. Here's another one. Ted Turner, founder of CNN, who called Christianity a religion for losers, was raised in a fundamentalist church home and school. Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy, was raised in a strict Methodist church. 86% of LGBTQ people were raised in a faith community, with most raised in evangelical religious communities. So strictness isn't the answer. Here's another one. Isolation is not the answer. My parents did a wonderful job of isolating us from neighbors, from unsaved influences. I remember the last time I went to a movie as a kid. I was 10 years old, went with my next door neighbor, Robbie Brazos. We saw the Apple Dumpling Gang. And then the next year, my parents heard about the evil of movies. I didn't see a movie again till The Lion King came out in 1996. And we took our little daughter, Kate, who was 4 years old, and I walked into the movie theater, and I was nervous as all get out, because for 18 years of my life, I was told the movie theater was an evil place, and I walked in thinking, oh no, someone's going to see me. I'm a pastor now. I haven't been in the movie since I was 10. And I suddenly began to realize all this isolation from the culture really didn't do anything for me except make me add to the Word of God all these extra rules. And by God's grace, I didn't rebel against that, but I realized you can't be isolated. Now, you need to be protected, but not isolated. Notice consistency, patience, genuineness is the soil in which faith grows in the heart. Protect your kids from evil influences, but you can't isolate them altogether. Be patient with them. One of the favorite things my wife and I always say, because our kids, each of them went through times, a period in our lives where we're thinking, oh my goodness, what has become of this kid? God works in lifetimes. So you might have a child that strays for a while into sin. Pray for them, lovingly exhort them. Be patient. It may take 20 years. But if they're truly God's children, God will bring them back. So we need to be genuine. When my wife and I do couples retreats, as Aaron and Jessica know. Jessica, right? Yes. They were at the couples retreat. We spoke at recently. My wife and I will lay out all the ugly truth about our marriage, our fights, our conflict. Why? Because we want people to know the real us. Our kids can tell you embarrassing things about what it was like to grow up in our home. But they would say, as flawed as our parents were, they were genuine. We knew. And from the time my kids were little, if I yelled at them for something, I would come back later and get on my knees in front of them and say, listen, Daddy was wrong. I got angry, and there's no excuse for that. Will you forgive me? If you're a parent of an adult child and you've never apologized to your kids yet for the things you did wrong, there's a huge barrier between you and them. You need to confess your sin to them. I was wrong when I said this. I was wrong when I called you this name. I was wrong when I disciplined you in anger. And I want you to know I've recognized, acknowledged that was sinful of me. I failed you as a parent. Will you forgive me? If you've never done that with your kids, you're not as close as you should be or you think you are. because every parent fails. I fully expect and have experienced this. Now my kids are 29, 27, 25. There are times where our kids have come back to us and said, "You really hurt me, Dad, when I was 12, and you said this to me." I may not even remember it, but my response is always, "I am so sorry that I failed you. I did wrong. I have no excuse. Will you forgive me?" If you're not on that relationship with your kids, then don't be surprised if they get bitter. Why? Because every one of us grew up in a home where our parents failed us. Our parents hurt us with words or actions. And as Christians, it ought to be our very nature when we acknowledge that I did something to my kids that was wrong, that I confess it. I say what God says about my behavior. That's what confession is. I agree with God about my behavior. If you can't do that, then don't be surprised if your kids are turned off to the gospel, because they're going to say, "Here's my mom who told me all her life that she was a Christian, yet she consistently did this. She controlled my behavior, and it was oppressive." Moms, if you haven't apologized for that and acknowledged that that was wrong, maybe your intention was good. I was trying to keep you from harm, honey, but I went too far. Dad, your anger or your controlling nature or your apathy and your lack of involvement in their lives, if you don't acknowledge that, then there's going to be pain between you and your kids. So we tried growing up, whenever we got mad, yelled at our kids. We yelled at our kids. We sought to apologize to them, ask forgiveness. When we were too restrictive, to come back later and say, "You know what? I shouldn't have made such a big deal about that. You can watch Sesame Street. I don't know what I was thinking," But you make mistakes. And this is the soil. If you raise your kids this way, you're going to make mistakes. You apologize to them, say, "Listen, Dad was wrong. And you know what? I'm going to be wrong in the future. And when I'm wrong, I want you to be able to tell me that." This is one of the things that we did. We didn't learn this from our parents. We had to learn this from the gospel. So our kids would say, when I would get mad and yell when they're 12 and 13, they'd sit there and they're really quiet and they would say, "Dad, I know you're upset at me, but you don't have to yell." Well, that made me even madder, but they were right. And sometimes I'd say, "You're absolutely right. Go to your room. I can't even talk to you right now." And then I'd meekly go up to their bedroom and say, "You're right. I was mad and I was out of control. I was yelling and I shouldn't have done that. Now what you did was wrong and we need to address that, but you're right. Will you forgive me?" That's what we need in our Christian homes. So our kids grow up and say, "Listen, I'm hearing all this stuff from the world, but I know my parents and I know they're genuine. I wonder if this person's as genuine as my parents." And then when they find out they're not, they'll say, "Okay, I'm not sure what's wrong with this, but I do know this, is I know my parents and I know they're genuine. They admit when they do wrong. So I'm going to test this before I believe this." This is how you have kids that might make mistakes, might go the wrong way for a while in their teens and early 20s. But if they've grown up in a home where honesty and genuineness and humility and confession are part of the world, they'll say, "I don't find this anywhere out there. I might be drawn into this lifestyle for a little while, but I know how empty it is." And we've seen that with some of our kids that go astray and then they come back and say, "My parents warned me about this. I didn't believe them. I wanted to experience it myself, and I did, and now I have regrets. I should have listened to my parents." And they're drawn back. Why? Because their home is a place of love and nurturing. This makes parenting the hardest thing you'll ever do. And there's no guarantee, because your kids could still go into foolish sin. But this is the best soil to prepare them to follow God. So in parenting, we are seeking to provide an environment that nourishes a child's heart and mind toward the Lord. So we need to teach our kids the truth and give them good arguments for the Christian faith. They may still stray, but if they're honest with themselves, they'll say, "Well, I actually know what I'm doing is wrong, and I know that God is true, and I know I need to get back there," and you pray that God brings their heart back. That's the best way to influence them for the Lord. So now positively, what are some things we can do to provide this environment? Positively, start with yourself. Parents, grandparents, if you don't have a vibrant, growing relationship with Christ, why would your kids want one? See, if you're a come-to-church kind of dad, but you never pick up the Bible and read, you're not listening to good preaching and teaching, you're not seeking to grow in your faith, why would your kids ever do that? They see in you that you're a go-to-Sunday kind of dad because your dad's a good moral person, and they say, you know what? And they say correctly, I can be that without going to church. But if they know their dad is one who's in the Scriptures, if they know that their dad has a prayer list, and they can go open this up to the family section, and they see all the things. This is my prayer list for my family, for each of my kids individually. And they can go and say, I know my dad prays for me. And I want to go see, what's he praying for me about? And I have very honest prayer requests for each of my kids in here. Things that, here's one of my daughters who spends too much time on technology. I pray specifically that God would change her heart about that. And then my kids can go and look at this. And I've learned to do this through different mentors, through different God working in my life. Here's my prayer request for different things in my life for the next 6 months. And I just started a brand new one this month, so there's no red. But whenever I pray for something and God answers, I write the answer in red. When my kids were in college and their faith was kind of tenuous, they would come home sometimes, find this because it's always around the house, and they would look through, what has Dad been praying for me about, and what's the answer? That's dads. Dads, you are called to be the spiritual leader of your home. You can do this. You may not know the Scriptures as well as your wife. She might be a theological whiz. She might learn Greek and Hebrew and be able to read it in the original languages. But dads, you are called to lead, and the very least you can do is to spend time in the Word. This is all I do, my spiritual journal. I write down every day, what did I read in the Bible? And I write down one verse that stood out to me, and I try to think about it several times a day. That's all I do. And then in my prayer list, I pray for each member of my family, and every 6 months, I make a new list of things I want to see God accomplish, and I write down. Half the time the answer is no. I might pray that my kids, who are living with their in-laws would be able to find a house. And for 2 years, nope, they're still living there, and finally God answers. Moms, do you do this? The single most important reason that changed my life and put me into ministry, so that by the time I was 12 years old, I knew I wanted to be a pastor. Because as a 7-year-old, I saw the radical transformation in my mom's life when she came to Christ. My dad died last year. I don't really know if he was ever saved or not. He claimed to be, but his life never matched up. It was my mom. The way when she got saved, she was in the Word, sitting on the couch every day, reading the Bible, highlighting, writing notes, doing Bible studies. That changed my life because I know this is real because I've seen the change in my mom's life. This is what I want to do with my life. Parents, we cannot hope that our kids will grow up to love the Lord if they don't see it's an all-consuming love for us. And all it starts is what we call the ordinary, common means of grace. God has given us the Word, prayer, church, ordinances like baptism and the Lord's Supper. Those are the things that God has given for us to grow. And if you're not doing that, why would your kids do it? So there's the conviction. There's the sermon right there. Catechism. Start early addressing apologetic issues with your children. There are wonderful catechisms that have been around forever. My little 3-year-old grandkids are learning the catechism. Who made you? God made me. Why did God make you? Or what else did God make? God made all things. Why did God make you in all things? God made me in all things for His glory. 3-year-olds are learning this. You know what happens when you don't catechize their kids? They graduate from high school and someone comes along, a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, and they say, you believe in the Trinity? Why do you believe that? I don't know. What do you believe about the Trinity? I really don't know. You catechize your kids, you teach them these things, they learn this. They may not fully understand it yet, but they grew up speaking the language of Christian doctrine. Educate, don't indoctrinate. So don't make your kids watch really bad Christian movies and TV. Don't make them watch God's Not Dead. I don't care for that movie, quite frankly. The message in the movie, if you've seen it, I know it's in a good attempt to do apologetics, is if you have a college professor who doesn't believe, hit him with your car, and as he's dying on the street, he'll get saved. That's the message of the movie, I think. Don't make them wear dumb WWJD bracelets, but teach them the truth. Read Deuteronomy 6. When you rise up, when you sit down, when you walk by the way, when you go out to the town and farm, talk about the Lord. We tried having regular family devotions with a little church service and singing and taking an offering. The kids were always very stingy on that. And I would give a long-winded Bible challenge, and then one of my kids would fart, and it was over. Like, they couldn't stop laughing. I'm like, what is the use of this? So we did that semi-regularly, but what we did do day by day is talk about the Lord. You had a fight with your friend? Let's talk about that. Grandma got sick. You know, Grandma's going to die someday. You know, let's talk about what God says about that kind of thing. You're sad today because someone hurt your feelings. Let's talk about that. That's teaching your kids, not indoctrinating them. We should teach them the truth, but talk about God as if it's a normal part of life. Use a conversational approach to teaching your children. There it is. I was jumping the gun. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. Everything you do in life, bring God into it. You cheated on the test today and the teacher, gave you a 0. Let's talk about why'd you cheat? How do we need to live? What's wrong with that? This is how you teach your kids about God and about his character and nature. Expose them to unbelievers and talk about the differences. My parents never did. Once they got saved and were in these churches, man, we had no unsaved friends, so I didn't know any unsaved people. Let your friends play with unsaved kids as long as they're not, dealing drugs with them and, teaching them things. But let them play on the town soccer teams, but talk to them. You're going to meet kids who swear. You're going to meet kids who don't believe this. So let's talk about how to talk about Jesus. And when you go to their birthday party, things are going to happen that are wrong, and recognize what it is. As Christians, we don't do these kind of things, but we can still be friends with them. Limit their exposure to influences about which you can instruct them. That is, kid comes home and says, I want to watch this latest movie. And in this latest movie, it promotes things. Like in some children's shows now, there are LGBTQ characters being introduced, or there's things being introduced. Tell them, here's why we're not going to watch this movie now, maybe when you're older, but we're going to talk about things that you see. We're going to talk about this kind of music. So you want to listen to the latest pop music? Let's listen to the song together. So what do you think about all that, those F words and calling women terrible names? Well, Dad, I don't think we should do that. That's right. And that's why we don't listen to this music. But there's good alternative music here we can listen to. Talk about those things. Direct them. Speak to their heart and show them, here's why we don't listen to music that calls women derogatory names. Would you like if someone called your sister that or your mom that? No, that's right. And we shouldn't listen to any music that does that kind of thing, because God says we're to uphold the dignity of human beings. Expect doubt. Sorry, I'm really fine. My wife is monitoring my health, as she always does. So she's seeing me pat my forehead. I'm just sweating up here because it's getting warm in here. I'm feeling fine, honey, don't worry. She's seen me at my worst, so she's my health care professional. At every point, with each of our kids, at a point in their life, they came to me and said, Dad, how do we know what we believe is right? Why? Because each of them, when they turned 14, they went to work at a assisted living center serving in the dining room, and they work with agnostics and Hindus and Muslims. And sometimes they'd come home and they'd say, Dad, my unsaved friends treat me nicer than my Christian friends, so how do we know what we believe is really true? That's going to happen. That's good. Okay, let's talk about your unsaved friends. They're really nice to you. That's great. But to realize what they believe, let's look at, is Islam true? Is Hinduism true? Let's talk about your agnostic friends. We let them learn to have conversations and negotiate these things so they learn to do apologetics and they learn to work through these things on their own. Expose them to the consequences of sin without exposing them to temptations. This was easy for me when I was a pastor. I was a pastor in an urban setting. We had drug addicts and alcoholics coming to church all the time. They were on the streets outside our church. We didn't rush kids into the church and cover their eyes. We would say, see that guy? You see why he's stumbling? Because he's drunk. This is what alcohol does when you misuse it. See this guy right here? You know our friend? He's a really nice guy, but you know how he acts weird sometimes? Because he blew his mind on drugs. This is why we don't take drugs, because it destroys your heart and mind and destroys your body. You see the couple in the church that are getting divorced and the kids are crying all the time? This is why we're very careful who we choose to marry, and we commit to this for life, and we work hard to maintain marriage. I want my kids to see the devastation of sin without exposing them to it. You know, I don't want them to say, see those kids over there? They're dealing drugs. Go over and make friends with them. No, they're doing something that's destructive, and we want to avoid that. But we still love them and want to see them come to know Christ. Make Christ as glorious as he really is. That is in your life, as God blesses you, share with your kids. Kids, I got to tell you about the verse I read today. It so encouraged me. It might not mean anything to your 15-year-old daughter at the time who's just wondering, does that boy really like me in school? But day by day, week by week, as you talk about what Jesus means to you, kids, you know I love you. I want you to know how much I love Jesus too. Do you want to know what Jesus has done for me? You want to know what it means that I'm saved? We have neighbors here who don't know the Lord, and the truth is they just lost a family member, and they have no hope. But as Christians, we have hope. Isn't that amazing? Like just layer upon layer of talking about Christ. Very quickly, 2 more points. Pray fervently. I know anyone who has kids prays for them. But do you pray consistently? Do you pray specifically? And then tell them, I'm praying for you. Yeah, Mom, I know you tell me all the time. At some point in their life, it's going to click. My mom's praying for me. Maybe I'm in the military now. Maybe I've gotten a job and moved far away, and something happened, and I'm really scared. I can call Mom because I know she's praying for me. I can call my dad because I know he's on my knees every day for me. And then finally, be patient. Oh, you know this if your kids are older. It's lifetimes, it's years. Your kids might do something, and you might think, I've lost them, and then you really don't know. With 2 of our kids, their relationship with the Lord has seemed to come easy. With one of our kids, it's a constant struggle. And there's been times in that child's life where we've said, we've lost them. And months go by or a couple years, and we think, we don't even know, is God even working in their life? And then that child will say, I was listening to a sermon online. I really loved it, and God really spoke to me. We're like, oh, thank you, Lord. A sign, a crumb that something is going on there. But I would say this is the nature. Every parent goes through this, and by God's grace, we can see God work in our children's lives. Thank you so much for your endurance today. Thank you. I'm hungry again, so let's